The year was 1887, and the Wyoming sky stretched endless and indifferent above Sundown Ridge. Fire licked at the night, consuming the main house of Mason Holloway's ranch in hungry, spiraling flames that painted the darkness in shades of hell. Rain fell in sheets, yet did nothing to quell the inferno that devoured wood and memory alike. Mason stood frozen at the edge of the property, his clothes plastered to his skin, rain mixing with the ash on his face. The thunder of his heartbeat drowned out even the storm's fury as realization struck him like lightning. His children were still inside. "Sophia! Nathan!" His voice broke as he lunged toward the burning structure. The heat pushed him back like a ball, singeing his eyebrows and scorching his lungs. Behind him, ranch hands struggled to organize a bucket line, their shouts muffled by the storm's rage. Through the curtain of rain and smoke, Mason spotted a silhouette moving with purpose toward the burning house. Slim and swift, the figure ducked beneath a collapsing beam and disappeared into the inferno. Mason's breath caught in his throat. No one from his ranch would be foolish enough to enter that death trap. Minutes stretched like years. The roof began to sag inward, timbers groaning their final protests. Mason fell to his knees in the mud, a wordless prayer dying on his lips. Then, like a specter emerging from the underworld, the figure reappeared in the doorway. In each arm, a small child, limp but moving. Mason scrambled forward through the mud, reaching them just as the mysterious savior collapsed. Lightning split the sky, illuminating features that made Mason's breath catch: high cheekbones, copper skin, and traditional Apache markings partially obscured by soot and blisters. A woman, unconscious now, had saved his children. "Pa!" Sophia coughed, small arms reaching for him. Nathan remained silent, eyes wide with terror, but breathing. "Get them to the storehouse." Mason commanded a nearby ranch hand, reluctantly passing his children to safety. He turned back to their rescuer, gathering her slight form in his arms. The woman's skin burned against his rain-soaked shirt, angry blisters forming where the fire had kissed her flesh. Without hesitation, Mason carried her toward the only structure left standing, a stone storehouse set away from the main buildings. As he walked, the ranch house gave a final groan and collapsed inward, sending a geyser of sparks toward the weeping heavens. Dawn broke sullen and gray over the remains of Sundown Ridge. Where a proud homestead had stood for 15 years, only charred timbers and smoking ruins remained. Mason sat on an upturned barrel outside the stone storehouse, watching his children sleep on a makeshift bed of grain sacks and horse blankets. Their faces were smudged with soot, but miraculously neither had suffered serious harm. The Apache woman lay nearby on a separate pallet. Her breathing had steadied through the night, but she hadn't stirred. Mason had cleaned and dressed her burns as best he could with limited supplies, knowledge from his time as a field medic during the war guiding his hands. "You gonna tell the sheriff about her?" Porter Briggs, Mason's foreman, stood at the doorway, his weathered face twisted with suspicion as he nodded toward the unconscious woman. Mason's jaw tightened. "Tell him what exactly?" "That an Apache was hanging around your property the same night your house burns down? Ain't no coincidence, Mr. Holloway." Mason stood slowly, fatigue making his movements deliberate. "This woman ran into a burning building to save my children. I'd say that earns her the benefit of the doubt." Porter shifted uncomfortably. "Folks in Broken Pine ain't gonna see it that way. They'll just see another redskin." "Then they don't need to know," Mason replied, a finality in his tone that brooked no argument. "Not until we understand what happened." After Porter departed to oversee what remained of the ranch hands, Mason returned his attention to the mysterious woman. Her features were striking even in unconsciousness, strong but feminine, with long lashes that cast shadows on her cheeks. The blisters on her arms and shoulders would scar, permanent reminders of her inexplicable bravery. Who was she? What had brought her to Sundown Ridge on this of all nights? And why would she risk her life for the children of a stranger? A white stranger, no less. The sound of small feet padding across the stone floor drew Mason's attention. Sophia, her blonde hair tangled from restless sleep, knelt beside the Apache woman's pallet. "Is the angel going to wake up, Pa?" she asked, her voice small in the quiet morning. Mason felt a tightness in his chest. "She's not an angel, sweetheart. She's a woman who helped us." But she came through the fire, Sophia insisted, just like in my dreams. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran down Mason's spine. What dreams? Sophia reached out, her small hand hovering over the woman's before gently touching her fingertips. The ones where Mama brings her to us. Mason's breath caught. Eleanor had been gone 2 years, taken by childbed fever after delivering the twins. He'd never spoken to the children about their mother's Apache friends, the medicine woman who had helped during the difficult birth, the hunters who had supplied meat during his wife's pregnancy. Those connections had died with Eleanor, lost in his grief and withdrawal. Sophia, you need to rest, he said gently, guiding her back to the makeshift bed where Nathan still slept. Her name is Mahala, Sophia mumbled as she curled beside her brother. The Fire Lady. Mason froze. How do you know that name? But Sophia had already drifted back to sleep, leaving Mason with questions that multiplied like shadows at dusk. 3 days passed before Mahala opened her eyes. When she did, they were dark and fathomless, reflecting the wariness of a cornered animal. She tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandaged burns. Easy, Mason said from where he sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood. You're safe. The woman's gaze darted around the storehouse, taking in the stone walls, the makeshift beds, the children playing quietly in the corner with carved wooden animals. When her eyes returned to Mason, they held no trust, only calculation. The children are well? She asked, her English clear but accented. Mason nodded, surprised. Thanks to you. A moment passed between them, filled with unspoken questions. Mason set down his knife in the half-formed eagle taking shape beneath his hands. My name is Mason Holloway. This is my ranch, or what's left of it. He gestured to the small window, through which the blackened skeleton of the main house was visible. I'd like to thank you properly for saving my children, but I don't understand why you were here. Mahala's face remained impassive, though a flicker of something, pain or memory, passed through her eyes. I was traveling, saw the fire. She looked away as if the simple explanation was all she could offer. Mason knew evasion when he heard it. Years as a battlefield surgeon had taught him to read people's truths in the spaces between their words. But before he could press further, a commotion outside drew his attention. Victoria Blackwood's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. Mason Holloway, I know you're in there. With a sigh, Mason rose and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Victoria stood beside her polished buggy, immaculate in a tailored riding habit despite the dusty road and early hour. As the manager of Broken Pine's only bank, she maintained appearances with religious fervor. Victoria, Mason greeted her, conscious of his own disheveled state. He hadn't properly bathed since the fire, and his clothes bore the evidence of labor as he and the hands salvaged what they could from the ruins. I came as soon as I heard, she said, softening slightly. I'm sorry about your home. The sympathy in her voice seemed genuine, but her eyes remained sharp, assessing. Thank you. The bank is concerned about your loan. No preamble, just business. With your house destroyed and winter coming. The ranch itself is intact, Mason interrupted. The cattle are fine, the barn's untouched. I'll rebuild. Victoria's gloved hand tightened on her parasol. With what funds, Mason? You're already behind on payments. A familiar anger stirred in his chest. Victoria had been tightening the screws ever since her husband's death 2 years ago, as if she blamed Mason somehow for Thomas Blackwood's fatal accident. I'll find a way, he said evenly. Victoria's gaze flicked to the storehouse door. I heard you have a guest. The hesitation before guest carried volumes of implication. News traveled fast in small communities, especially news involving Indians. My children's rescuer, Mason replied, stepping subtly to block her view. How fortunate she happened to be passing by. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. The railway representatives will be back next week. Their offer still stands, more than enough to clear your debts and start fresh somewhere else. Mason's jaw clenched. The Western Pacific Railroad had been trying to buy his land for months, offering increasing sums as he repeatedly refused. His land included a crucial pass through the foothills, the most direct route for their planned expansion. My answer hasn't changed. Victoria sighed dramatically. Sentiment is a luxury, Mason, especially now. She turned back to her buggy, arranging her skirts as she settled onto the seat. You have 30 days to make good on your payments, or the bank will have to consider foreclosure. As she drove away, Mason felt a presence behind him. Mahala stood in the storehouse doorway, her posture rigid despite her injuries. The woman speaks of taking your land, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Mason nodded wearily. They all want something from Sundown Ridge. What do they want? He turned to study her face, searching for motives behind her question. What do you want, Mahala? Her eyes widened fractionlessly, surprised that he knew her name. Before she could respond, Sophia darted past Mason and threw her arms around Mahala's legs. You're awake, the little girl exclaimed. I told Pa you would be. I told him your name too. Confusion and wariness battled across Mahala's features as she looked down at the child, then back to Mason. My daughter says she dreamed of you, he explained, watching her reaction carefully. Before the fire, before you saved them. Something flashed in Mahala's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or fear. She gently disentangled herself from Sophia's embrace. Children have strong spirits, she said carefully. They see what adults cannot. Before Mason could press further, Nathan emerged from the storehouse, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Unlike his sister's immediate affection, the boy regarded Mahala with solemn curiosity. Skase ha hey, he said suddenly, the Apache greeting flowing naturally from his small mouth. Mason felt the world tilt beneath him. His children didn't speak Apache. They'd never been exposed to the language, except perhaps in Eleanor's final days, when the medicine woman had come. Mahala's composure cracked, genuine surprise flickering across her features. She responded in Apache, a soft phrase that made Nathan smile. Then she looked at Mason, a new understanding passing between them. Your children and I, she said slowly, we have much to discuss, Doctor. Solomon Fairchild's wagon rolled into Sundown Ridge a week after the fire, the elderly physician's arrival as reliable as the changing seasons. Mason had been expecting him. The doctor made monthly rounds to the outlying ranches, a service begun during the war and maintained through peace with the dedication of a man who saw medicine as a calling rather than a profession. What Mason hadn't expected was Mahala's reaction. At the first sight of the wagon, she had retreated to the farthest corner of the storehouse, her eyes wide with recognition and something akin to fear. It's just the doctor, Mason assured her. He's harmless. Mahala shook her head. He knows me, she said simply. Before Mason could question her further, Dr. Fairchild was calling out greetings, his voice strong despite his 70 years. Mason stepped outside, closing the storehouse door behind him. Mason, my boy. The doctor climbed down from his wagon with surprising agility, medical bag in hand. Terrible business, this fire. Everyone well? The children are fine, thanks to... Mason hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Thanks to the Apache woman, Fairchild finished for him, his blue eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Word travels. May I see her? Burns can be nasty business if not treated properly. Mason's surprise must have shown on his face, for the doctor chuckled. Did you think I'd be shocked? Scandalized. He shook his head. I've treated more Indians than white men in my time, and found them generally more grateful patients. Reluctantly, Mason led him into the storehouse. Mahala had composed herself, sitting cross-legged on her pallet, but her eyes remained wary as they followed the doctor's movements. Fairchild stopped a respectful distance away. Hello, Mahala, he said gently. It's been a long time. Mason looked between them. You two know each other? The doctor nodded. Mahala is the granddaughter of Dancing Elk, a healer of great renown among the Apache. I had the privilege of learning from him many years ago. He turned back to Mahala. I was saddened to hear of his passing, and your husband's. A shadow passed across Mahala's face. Many have died, she said simply. May I examine your burns? Fairchild asked, holding up his bag. As one healer to another? After a moment's consideration, Mahala nodded. As the doctor approached, Mason stepped outside to give them privacy, his mind racing. Eleanor had spoken of a medicine man named Dancing Elk, a friend of her father's who had taught her about native plants and their uses. Another connection between his late wife and this mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere to save his children. When Dr. Fairchild emerged sometime later, his expression was thoughtful. "She'll heal well," he reported. "She's been using a salve of her own making. Quite effective. I've left her some clean bandages." He paused, glancing back at the storehouse. "Mason, do you know why she's here?" Mason shook his head. "She claims she was just passing Beacon Day." The doctor made a noncommittal sound. "Mahala was training to be a healer when her people were forced onto the reservation. After her husband and son died in a cavalry raid, she left to seek the sacred lands of her ancestors." "Sacred lands?" Fairchild nodded. "The Apache believe certain places hold power, where the veil between worlds is thin, places of healing." He looked pointedly at Mason. "Places like the hidden spring beneath Sundown Ridge." The revelation hit Mason like a physical blow. The underground spring that fed his wells and kept his cattle watered even in the driest summers was his ranch's greatest asset and its best-kept secret. Few knew of its existence, and none knew its true extent. "How do you know about that?" Mason asked, his voice low. The doctor's eyes held a mixture of compassion and regret. "Because Eleanor told me. She discovered it with the help of Mahala's grandmother shortly before the twins were born." "That's not possible," Mason insisted. "Eleanor never mentioned knowing any Apache woman." "There's much Eleanor didn't tell you," Fairchild said gently. "She was afraid of your reaction. Your experiences in the war left you with certain prejudices." Mason felt as though the ground were shifting beneath his feet. Eleanor keeping secrets? His sweet, open-hearted wife who had shared everything with him? Her hopes, her fears, her dreams for their future children? "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Mahala didn't come here by chance," Fairchild said, "and your children didn't survive that fire by luck." He placed a weathered hand on Mason's shoulder. "Eleanor made arrangements before she died, contingencies to protect her children in this land. I believe those arrangements are now coming to fruition." Before Mason could demand further explanation, the sound of hoofbeats approached. A group of riders appeared on the ridge, led by a tall figure Mason recognized immediately: Jefferson Pike, the railway company's representative, a man whose smile never reached his cold gray eyes. "Trouble," Mason muttered. "More than you know," Fairchild replied. "Pike has been asking questions in town, about your water rights, about old Apache claims to this land. What does the railroad want with Apache claims? The same thing they want with your ranch, control of the water." The doctor's voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful, Mason. Pike isn't just after your land. He's after what lies beneath it." As the riders drew closer, Mason saw Pike's calculating gaze sweep over the burned ruins of the main house, assessing, measuring. The man raised a hand in greeting, but there was nothing friendly in the gesture, only the satisfaction of a predator finding its prey weakened. Inside the storehouse, hidden from view, Mahala began to sing softly, an Apache melody that wound through the air like smoke. The twins, playing nearby, fell silent. Then, to Mason's astonishment, they joined in, their childish voices harmonizing perfectly with Mahala's deeper tones, a song they couldn't possibly know in a language they had never been taught. Jefferson Pike dismounted with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His tailored suit bore not a speck of dust despite the long ride, and his boots gleamed in the afternoon sun. Behind him, 4 men remained mounted, hired muscle, poorly disguised as railroad employees. "Holloway," Pike greeted him, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Dreadful business, this fire. My condolences." "Appreciated," Mason replied flatly, "though I don't recall sending word to the railroad about my misfortune." Pike's smile tightened. "News travels, especially unfortunate news." His gaze shifted to Dr. Fairchild. "Doctor, always a pleasure." The elderly physician nodded curtly. "Mr. Pike, I've come to renew our offer," Pike continued, returning his attention to Mason. "In light of recent events, the Western Pacific is prepared to increase the purchase price for Sundown Ridge by 15%. "My answer remains the same," Mason said. "This land is not for sale." Pike sighed dramatically. "Mr. Holloway, I admire your determination, but sentiment is a poor foundation for business decisions." He gestured toward the burned ruins. "Your home is destroyed. Winter approaches. The bank is breathing down your neck." "My business is my concern," Mason replied evenly. Is it? Pike's voice hardened. I wonder if the good people of Broken Pine would agree, once they learn you're harboring an Apache woman, a member of the same tribe that raided the Henderson farm last spring. Mason felt his blood run cold. Are you threatening me, Pike? Merely pointing out realities. Pike stepped closer, lowering his voice. The Apache woman leaves or the town hears about her presence. Your choice. Before Mason could respond, the storehouse door creaked open. Mahala stood in the doorway, her posture regal despite her injuries. The twins flanked her like small guardians. Pike's eyes widened, then narrowed with calculated interest. Well, well, the rumors are true. Mahala's gaze settled on Pike with the intensity of a hawk studying a snake. This man brings darkness, she said in clear English. He smells of smoke and lies. A muscle twitched in Pike's jaw, the first crack in his composed facade. I see your savage has a tongue, he said to Mason. You'd be wise to muzzle her before she says something unfortunate. Mason stepped between them. You've delivered your message, Pike. Now get off my land. For a tense moment, it seemed Pike might refuse. Then he smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Of course. But consider my offer carefully, Holloway. Some opportunities only present themselves once. He glanced at Mahala. Some threats as well. As Pike and his men rode away, Mason turned to Mahala. You shouldn't have shown yourself. He already knew I was here, she replied. The small man who works for you, Porter, he tells many things when silver crosses his palm. Mason cursed under his breath. Porter Briggs had worked Sundown Ridge for 5 years, but his loyalty had always been to the highest bidder. If he was feeding information to Pike, Pa, Sophia tugged at his sleeve, her small face solemn. The bad man started the fire. I saw him in my dream. Mason knelt to his daughter's level. Sweetheart, dreams aren't real. But they are, Nathan insisted, speaking up for the first time. Mahala says dreams are how the ancestors talk to us. Mason glanced at the Apache woman, who watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. Children have open spirits, she said simply. They see truth where adults see only what they expect. Dr. Fairchild cleared his throat. Mason, there's something you should know about Eleanor's final days. Mason felt a familiar ache at the mention of his wife's name. Doc, whatever this is, can it wait? I've got Pike breathing down my neck and a ranch to rebuild. I'm afraid it can't, the doctor replied gravely. Because if Pike knows about Mahala, he may know about the box. What box? Fairchild and Mahala exchanged a look laden with significance. Eleanor's medicine box, the doctor explained. The one she kept hidden in the attic. A memory surfaced. Eleanor's strange insistence that a small, carved box be kept in the attic room, away from prying eyes. Mason had assumed it contained personal mementos, perhaps letters from her father, or pressed flowers from their courtship. He'd respected her privacy, never questioning. The fire, he began. The attic room stands, Mahala interrupted. I saw it when I entered. The spirits protected it. Mason looked toward the ruins of his home. The central portion had collapsed entirely, but part of the east wing remained partially intact, including the small attic room where Eleanor had spent so many hours during her pregnancy, writing in her journal or sorting dried plants. What's in this box that would interest Pike? He demanded. A map, Fairchild said, and the deed to water rights that predate your ownership of this land, rights granted to Dancing Elk's people generations ago. Mason struggled to process the implications. You're saying my land was Apache land first, Mahala finished for him. Sacred land, healing land. Her eyes held no accusation, only a deep certainty. Land that Pike would kill for. The twins had moved to stand on either side of Mahala, their small hands finding hers as naturally as saplings reaching for sunlight. Mason watched the unconscious gesture with a mixture of wonder and unease. These children, his children, had formed a bond with this woman in mere days that seemed to transcend normal understanding. Pa, Nathan said, his voice unusually firm for a 6-year-old, we need to get Mama's box before the bad men come back. In that moment, looking into his son's eyes, Eleanor's eyes, Mason felt something shift within him. A certainty that nothing about Mahala's appearance or the fire or his children's strange behavior was coincidental. "All right," he said finally, "let's find this box." Dusk painted the Wyoming sky in watercolor hues as Mason picked his way through the ruins of his home. The smell of wet ash and charred wood hung heavy in the still air, mingling with the more pleasant aroma of wild sage that grew along the ridge. Mahala moved beside him, her steps sure despite her injuries, leading the way to the partially intact east wing. They had left the twins with Dr. Fairchild in the storehouse, despite their protests. Whatever they might find in the ruins, Mason wasn't willing to risk his children's safety among unstable timbers and exposed nails. "How did you know my wife?" Mason asked as they carefully navigated what had once been the main hallway. The truth this time. Mahala's expression remained carefully neutral. "I was apprenticed to my grandfather, dancing elk. When your wife came seeking help with a difficult pregnancy, I assisted. Eleanor never mentioned going to an Apache healer. She knew your feelings about my people." Mahala's voice held no judgment, only a simple statement of fact. The war left many scars, not all visible. Mason couldn't argue. After watching his unit decimated in an Apache ambush, he'd carried a deep distrust of all indigenous peoples. Eleanor had sensed it, had carefully avoided discussing native affairs despite her own upbringing on the frontier. "So she came to your people in secret," he said, the realization settling like a stone. "While I was away." Mahala nodded. "She feared losing the babies. Her mother died birthing her. She feared the same fate." The guilt Mason had carried since Eleanor's death intensified. If he'd been less rigid in his prejudices, would she have confided in him? Would he have been there when she needed him most, instead of drowning his wartime memories in a bottle at the saloon in Broken Pine? They reached what remained of the east wing staircase. The upper portion had survived, though it ended abruptly in midair where the lower steps had burned away. Mason searched among the debris, finding a sturdy beam he could prop against the edge of the surviving staircase. "Wait here," he told Mahala. "I'll go up and look for this box." "We go together," she replied firmly. "I know what we seek." Before he could protest, she was already climbing the makeshift ramp with surprising agility. Mason followed, aware that any argument would only waste precious time. The attic room had indeed survived largely intact, protected by its position at the far corner of the house. Eleanor's presence lingered here, in the faded curtains she had sewn, in the small writing desk where she had penned letters to her sister in Boston, in the dried lavender still hanging from the rafters. Mahala moved purposefully to a loose floorboard near the dormer window, prying it up with practiced ease. From the cavity beneath, she withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate symbols, some Apache, others that Mason recognized from Eleanor's family crest. "This is it," she said, turning to him with the box cradled in her hands. "Your wife's legacy." Mason stared at the intricate carvings. "I never knew this existed," he said, voice tight with emotion. "She kept it hidden for good reason," Mahala replied. "Yet you knew exactly where to find it." His tone carried a hint of accusation. Mahala met his gaze steadily. "Because she showed me before she died," Mason finished, studying Mahala's face. "Just how close were you to my wife? We shared more than knowledge. We shared trust." Mahala held out the box. Eleanor knew this day might come. Mason took the box hesitantly, feeling as though he stood on the edge of a precipice. This box contained secrets Eleanor had kept from him, a part of her life he had never known. "How do I open it?" he asked, examining the small brass lock mechanism. "Your wedding date," Mahala instructed. "Press the symbols in sequence." With careful fingers, Mason pressed them in the pattern of their anniversary, 5/12/78. The box clicked open. Inside lay several items: a folded parchment map, a leather-bound journal, a small pouch of dried herbs, and a legal document yellowed with age. Atop everything was a letter sealed with wax and bearing his name in Eleanor's delicate script. Mason stared at it, momentarily unable to breathe. Eleanor's last words to him, words she never expected him to read unless something had gone terribly wrong. "Read it," Mahala said gently. "It is time." With careful fingers, Mason broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Eleanor's handwriting flowed across the page, elegant and familiar, each loop and curve a ghost of her touch. "My dearest Mason, if you are reading this, then my fears have come to pass, and I am no longer by your side. I am so sorry for the secrets I have kept, not from lack of trust, but from fear of causing you pain. Beneath Sundown Ridge lies a great treasure, not gold or silver, but water, pure and abundant, flowing from an ancient spring sacred to the Apache people. My father knew of it when he purchased this land and swore to protect it from those who would exploit it. When complications arose with my pregnancy, I sought help from Dancing Elk, an Apache healer who once saved my father's life. His granddaughter Mahala assisted in a ritual at the sacred spring. Through their knowledge, our children were saved, though I fear the strain on my body was too great. I have made arrangements with Dr. Fairchild. Should anything happen to me, and should our children ever be in danger, Mahala will come. She is bound by oath to protect them, as I am bound to protect the sacred waters. The enclosed documents prove that water rights to the spring were legally granted to Dancing Elk's people by territorial authorities in 1852, predating our deed to the land. This truth must be protected, for there are those who would kill for such a prize in this dry country. Trust Mahala, my love. Where you see an enemy, I found a sister. Where you see savagery, I found wisdom deeper than our so-called civilization. All my love, for all time. Eleanor Mason lowered the letter, his vision blurred with unshed tears. The enormity of what Eleanor had hidden, what she had arranged, left him reeling. She knew she was going to die, he said, his voice hollow. Mahala's expression softened with compassion. She feared it, she prepared for it, but she never accepted it. And you? Mason looked at her directly. You've been waiting all this time to fulfill a promise to a dead woman? To protect sacred waters, Mahala corrected, to honor my grandfather's legacy, and, she hesitated, to repay a debt. Your wife saved my life once before I saved her children. A noise from below interrupted them, the sound of approaching horses. Mason moved to the small window. Through the gathering darkness, he could make out several riders approaching the ranch, Pike's tall figure unmistakable at their head. We need to go, he said urgently. Pike's back, and he's brought more men. Mahala gathered the box's contents, securing them inside her deerskin shirt. As they turned to leave, a floorboard creaked behind them. Porter Briggs stood at the top of the makeshift ramp, a revolver aimed steadily at Mason's chest. Sorry, Mr. Holloway, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Pike's paying gold for that box and whatever's in it. Mason tensed, calculating the distance between them, the chances of disarming Porter before he could fire. No need for anyone to get hurt, Porter continued. Just hand over whatever you found and I'll tell Pike you were both gone when we arrived. After you betrayed us to him in the first place? Mason's voice was tight with anger. Porter shrugged. Business is business. Times are hard. And honor is nothing? Mason took a step forward. After 5 years working my land, breaking bread at my table? Honor doesn't pay debts, Porter replied, but his gun hand wavered slightly. In that moment of hesitation, Mahala began to sing, a low, melodious chant that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. Porter's eyes widened, the gun drooping further as he stared at her in confusion. What the hell? He began. Mason lunged, tackling Porter to the dusty attic floor. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet splintering the rafters overhead. They grappled in the confined space, years of ranch work having hardened both men into formidable opponents. Porter fought with desperate strength, driving a knee into Mason's stomach and breaking free long enough to scramble for the fallen revolver. His fingers had just closed around the handle when a shadow fell across him. Mahala stood above him, Eleanor's heavy oak writing box raised high. It connected with Porter's temple with a sickening thud, and the foreman collapsed unconscious. We must hurry, she said, extending a hand to help Mason up. They will have heard the shot. Mason nodded grimly, binding Porter's hands with the man's own belt. There's a back way down through what's left of the kitchen garden. We can circle around to the storehouse. As they slipped away through the gathering darkness, Mason felt the weight of Eleanor's letter against his heart, where Mahala had tucked it for safekeeping. His world had shifted on its axis, certainties crumbling like the charred remains of his home. Behind them, Jefferson Pike's voice rose in the night, ordering his men to search the ruins. The hunt had begun, not just for them, but for a secret that had been buried beneath Sundown Ridge for generations. When they reached the storehouse, Dr. Fairchild was waiting anxiously with the twins, a loaded shotgun across his knees. The elderly physician's relief at their return quickly gave way to alarm at their news. "Pike won't stop now," he warned, helping Mason secure the heavy wooden door. "Not when he's so close to what he wants." "Which is what, exactly?" Mason demanded, checking his own rifle. "Water rights? There are other springs in these hills." "None like yours," Fairchild replied gravely. "The aquifer beneath Sundown Ridge isn't just abundant. It's pure, untainted by the minerals that make most Western water alkaline, perfect for steam engines." Understanding dawned. The railroad needs clean water for their locomotives. Hundreds of thousands of gallons, the doctor confirmed. Without it, they'd have to reroute the line 50 miles south at enormous expense. Mason looked to Mahala, who sat cross-legged on the floor with Sophia in her lap, singing softly while the little girl played with her long black braid. Nathan stood by the single window, peering through a crack in the shutters with solemn intensity. "They're coming this way, Pa," the porch reported, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. Mason joined his son at the window. Through the narrow opening, he could see Pike and 3 armed men approaching the storehouse, lanterns casting long shadows across the yard. 2 more men were visible near the ruins of the main house, likely searching for Porter. 5 armed men against 1 rifle and the doc's shotgun, Mason muttered. Not favorable odds. 6 men, Mahala corrected quietly. Another waits by the horses. Mason glanced at her in surprise. "You can see him from here?" "I hear him," she replied simply. The spirits whisper many things if one listens. Under other circumstances, Mason might have dismissed such talk. But after the events of the past week, his children's inexplicable knowledge of Apache language, Eleanor's revelations, Mahala's timely appearance, he found himself less certain about the boundaries between the possible and impossible. "What do we do, Pa?" Sophia asked, her small voice cutting through his thoughts. Mason looked at his daughter, at both his children, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise within him. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath his land, whatever promises Eleanor had made, one thing was certain. He would not let Pike or anyone else threaten his family. "We run," he decided, meeting Mahala's gaze. "There's a trail through the backcountry that leads to the old Apache territories. If we can reach it before dawn, we might lose them in the foothills." Fairchild nodded grimly. "I'll create a diversion. Buy you some time." "No," Mason protested. "It's too dangerous." The elderly physician chuckled. "Pike won't harm a respected doctor. Besides, I'm too old and slow to make the journey you're proposing." He patted Mason's shoulder. "Go. Get those children to safety. I'll tell a convincing tale of your desperate flight in the opposite direction." A sharp rap on the storehouse door interrupted them. Pike's voice called out, falsely cordial. "Holloway, I know you're in there. Let's discuss this like civilized men." Mason signaled for silence, leading the group toward the back of the storehouse where a small door, half hidden behind grain sacks, offered escape. Originally built to allow quick access during winter storms, it had been unused for years, its existence forgotten by most. "Holloway," Pike called again, his tone hardening. "Don't make this difficult. All I want is the Apache woman and whatever she's carrying. The rest of you can go free." Mason eased the hidden door open, wincing at its faint creak. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. He checked outside. The rear of the storehouse opened onto a small gully that provided cover all the way to the tree line. "Go," he whispered, helping Mahala guide the twins through the opening. "I'll be right behind you." As they slipped into the darkness, Mason turned back to Dr. Fairchild, clasping the older man's hand in a firm goodbye. "Thank you for everything." The doctor smiled sadly. "Eleanor would be proud of you, son. Now go, find the truth she wanted you to know." Outside, the night enveloped them like a protective cloak. Mahala led the way with uncanny certainty, guiding them through the gully as if she had traveled it 100 times before. The twins followed close behind her, their small boots silent on the soft earth, their faces set with the determination that seemed beyond their years. Mason brought up the rear, rifle ready, constantly glancing back for signs of pursuit. They had nearly reached the tree line when a shout rang out from the direction of the storehouse, followed by the distinctive boom of the doctor's shotgun. "Run," Mason urged, scooping up Nathan as Mahala lifted Sophia. They plunged into the forest just as lantern lights spilled into the gully behind them. The pursuit had begun, but ahead lay the wilderness, and somewhere within it, answers to questions Mason had never thought to ask. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a storm approaching, much like the one that had raged the night Mahala emerged from fire with his children in her arms. As they fled deeper into the darkness, Mason wondered if this, too, had been part of Eleanor's design. This flight, this woman, this moment of reckoning with truths long buried. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then in earnest, nature's veil drawing close behind them, obscuring their trail and offering a chance, however slim, of escape. Dawn broke over the Wyoming wilderness, painting the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. Mason, Mahala, and the twins had taken shelter in a shallow cave halfway up a rocky slope, the entrance screened by a cascade of wild grapevines. They had traveled through the night, pushing on even when the children grew weary, stopping only when the first hint of light threatened to expose their position to pursuers. Now, as morning birds called to one another across the awakening forest, Mason kept watch at the edge of their sanctuary. Below, the land fell away in rolling waves of pine and scrub, offering a clear view of any approach. So far, there had been no sign of Pike or his men, but Mason harbored no illusions about their safety. A man willing to burn down a family home wouldn't be deterred by a night's tracking through rough country. Behind him, Mahala sat cross-legged with the twins curled against her like puppies, all three asleep despite the hard stone floor. The sight stirred something in Mason's chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. His children had known this woman mere days, yet they trusted her with the complete abandonment of the very young. Was it simply a child's resilience, or something deeper? Something connected to Eleanor's mysterious arrangements? The contents of Eleanor's box lay spread before him on a flat stone. The leather journal, the map, the legal document proving Apache water rights. He had been reading by the growing light, piecing together a story that challenged everything he thought he knew about his wife and their land. Eleanor's journal revealed a woman Mason had never fully known, passionate about indigenous medicine, secretly studying with dancing elk and Mahala for years before her pregnancy. She had discovered the true extent of the aquifer beneath Sundown Ridge, far greater than Mason had realized. The underground river stretched for miles, feeding not just his wells, but countless hidden springs throughout the region, including a sacred healing pool the Apache had protected for generations. The map showed the complete system, meticulously documented in Eleanor's precise hand. Such knowledge in the wrong hands would be devastating. A railroad company could drain the entire aquifer for their steam engines, destroying not just the sacred pool but the delicate ecological balance of the entire region. A soft rustling drew Mason's attention. Mahala had awakened and now watched him with those fathomless dark eyes. "You read her words," she said quietly, careful not to wake the children. Mason nodded. "She loved this land more than I knew." "She understood it," Mahala corrected gently. "The land is alive. It speaks, if one listens." In the past, Mason might have dismissed such talk as superstition. Now, after all he had witnessed, he found himself receptive to possibilities beyond his understanding. "The twins," he began, nodding toward his sleeping children. "They know you somehow. Sophia dreams of you. Nathan speaks your language." Mahala's expression softened as she looked at the children. "When your wife was dying, we performed a ceremony at the sacred pool. The children were with us, inside her, but their spirits were already strong." She met Mason's gaze directly. They were touched by the water, the prayers, the medicine. Such things leave marks on young souls. "And that's why they trust you? Because of some ceremony before they were born?" "They remember," Mahala said simply. "Children exist in many worlds at once. It is only as we grow older that we forget how to see beyond the surface of things." Mason wanted to argue, to insist on explanations that conformed to his understanding of reality. But the evidence before him, his children's inexplicable knowledge, Eleanor's secret life, Mahala's appearance exactly when they needed her most, demanded he expand his conception of what was possible. "Pike will keep coming," he said, changing the subject to more immediate concerns. "He won't stop until he has the map and the water rights." "He wants more than papers," Mahala replied gravely. "He wants control of the sacred pool itself." My people believe it has healing properties beyond ordinary medicine. Mason recalled moments from Eleanor's journal, descriptions of remarkable recoveries, plants that grew with unusual vitality when watered from the hidden springs, livestock that thrived beyond expectation. Is it true, he asked? Does the water have special properties? Mahala considered her answer carefully. Your science would say it contains minerals in perfect balance. My people would say it carries the breath of the Creator. Perhaps both are true. A small hand tugged at Mason's sleeve. Sophia had awakened and now stood beside him, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, her blue eyes, Eleanor's eyes, solemn in her small face. The bad men are coming, Pa, she said with a child's directness. I saw them in my dream. They're bringing more people. Mason exchanged a glance with Mahala, who nodded slightly. We should move, she said. There is a place not far from here, a friend who will help us. An Apache friend? Mason asked, uncertain. No, Mahala surprised him with a small smile. A friend of your wife's, a woman who does not fear Pike or his men. They traveled through the morning, keeping to game trails and sheltered ravines where their passage would leave minimal traces. The twins, despite their young age, moved with remarkable stamina, rarely complaining even when the path grew steep or rocky. Mason found himself marveling at their resilience, another gift perhaps from their extraordinary mother. By midday, they had descended into a narrow valley nestled between two ridgelines. A small creek meandered through stands of aspen, their leaves shimmering gold in the autumn sunlight. At the far end of the valley stood a cabin, sturdy and well-maintained, with smoke rising from its stone chimney. Margaret Fairchild's home, Mahala explained as they approached cautiously. The doctor's wife. Mason's surprise must have shown on his face, for Mahala added, she lives apart from him much of the year. He visits when he can. Before Mason could question this unusual arrangement, the cabin door opened. A woman emerged onto the porch, a shotgun held competently in weathered hands. She appeared to be in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid, her posture straight and dignified despite her years. Mahala, she called, lowering the weapon. I've been expecting you. The Apache woman inclined her head respectfully. Margaret, thank you for the shelter. Margaret Fairchild's keen eyes assessed the group, lingering on Mason and the twins. Eleanor's family, she said, a statement rather than a question. Solomon sent word you might come this way. You look half-starved and wholly exhausted. Come in. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious, divided into several rooms rather than the single open space common to frontier dwellings. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, their fragrance mingling with the aroma of something savory simmering over the fire. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes whose spines revealed subjects from medicine to botany to astronomy. Sit, Margaret directed, gesturing to a rustic table already set with bowls and spoons. Eat first. Questions after. The stew she ladled out was rich with vegetables and game, accompanied by crusty bread still warm from baking. Mason realized how hungry they all were. They had fled with only a handful of jerky and dried fruit, consumed hours ago. As they ate, Margaret moved around the cabin with efficient grace, gathering blankets and spare clothing that might fit the children. She spoke little, but Mason sensed a deep connection between her and Mahala, the comfortable silence of longtime companions who needed few words. When they had finished eating, Margaret poured coffee for the adults and sweet milk for the twins. Only then did she settle across from Mason, her gaze direct and assessing. So, she said simply, Pike burned your ranch. Mason nearly choked on his coffee. How did you? Solomon has ways of learning things, she interrupted, and Pike's methods are hardly a secret. 3 homesteads in the territory have mysteriously burned in the past year, all on land the railroad wanted. Why hasn't he been stopped? Mason demanded. Margaret's smile was bitter. Money buys influence. The territorial judge is Pike's second cousin. The marshal's office receives generous donations from Western Pacific. Then there's no justice to be had? Not through official channels, Margaret agreed, but there are other ways to fight. She turned to Mahala. Did you find Eleanor's box? Mahala nodded, withdrawing the documents from inside her shirt. The water rights, the map, her journal, all safe. Margaret examined the papers carefully, her expression thoughtful. These could stop Pike legally if we could find an honest judge, but that would take time we don't have. She looked up at Mason. He'll have men watching every trail, every town. He knows what's at stake. Which is what exactly? Mason asked, frustration edging his voice. I understand the water is valuable, but to go to these lengths, burning homes, hunting people through the wilderness. Margaret and Mahala exchanged a glance laden with meaning. Then the older woman sighed. Show him, she said to Mahala. It's time he knew the full truth. Mahala hesitated, then reached for the leather pouch that had been in Eleanor's box. From it, she withdrew a small glass vial filled with clear water. From the sacred pool, she explained, handing it to Mason. Your wife collected it the day before the twins were born. Mason held the vial up to the light. The water appeared ordinary, transparent and still. I don't understand. Put a drop on that, Margaret instructed, pointing to a small potted plant on the windowsill. Its leaves were brown and withered, clearly dying. Skeptical but curious, Mason did as she suggested, allowing a single drop to fall onto the parched soil. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, before his astonished eyes, a ripple of green began to spread through the dying plant. Withered leaves unfurled, brown edges retreating like tide going out. Within minutes, the plant stood vibrant and alive, as if it had never been distressed. Mason struggled to find words. That's impossible. Yet you saw it, Margaret said calmly. Now imagine what such water could do for more than plants, for animals, for people. The implications crashed over Mason like a wave. A miracle cure. The Apache have known of its properties for centuries, Mahala explained, using it sparingly, respectfully, for the greatest need. In the hands of men like Pike, it would be exploited, Mason finished for her, commodified, drained until nothing remained. Precisely, Margaret nodded. Pike doesn't just want water for his steam engines. He wants the secret of the sacred pool, a secret worth millions to the right buyers. Mason looked toward the twins who had finished their milk and now sat together by the fireplace, whispering to each other in a mixture of English and Apache. His children, who might never have been born without the intervention of the very forces he was only now beginning to understand. What does Pike know, he asked quietly, about the water's properties? Enough to be dangerous, Margaret replied. Thomas Blackwood, Victoria's husband, discovered the truth before his death. He was Eleanor's friend, committed to protecting the secret. And Pike killed him for it? Mason asked, the pieces falling into place. Margaret nodded grimly. It was disguised as a hunting accident. Only the two of them went into those woods that day. Only Pike returned unharmed. But there must have been an investigation, Mason pressed. The county coroner is Pike's cousin, Margaret said with bitter resignation. The territorial marshal receives generous donations from Western Pacific Railroad. So no justice for Thomas, Mason said softly. Victoria has been seeking justice her own way, Margaret explained, playing a dangerous game. By threatening to foreclose on my ranch, Mason's voice rose. How does that honor her husband's memory? Mahala placed a calming hand on his arm. Sometimes we must appear to serve the enemy to truly fight them. Victoria needed Pike to believe she was his ally, Margaret continued. It was the only way to stay close enough to gather evidence against him to warn us when he made his move. Including Victoria, Mason realized with growing horror. She's been pressuring me to sell to the railroad ever since her husband died. Victoria is complicated, Margaret said. Grief changes people. So does fear. The conversation was interrupted by Nathan's approach. The boy stood beside Mahala, his small face serious. Someone's coming, he said. I heard horses. Margaret moved to the window, peering carefully through the curtain. 3 riders, she confirmed grimly. Still distant, but heading this way. She turned to Mason. The back room has a cellar entrance. It leads to a tunnel that comes out by the creek. We can't keep running, Mason said, frustration evident in his voice. The children need stability, safety. And they'll have neither if Pike finds you, Margaret countered. Joseph White Eagle waits at the sacred pool. He can protect you there. The Apache lands are still sovereign territory beyond Pike's immediate reach. Joseph? Mason looked to Mahala. My brother, she explained, leader of our remaining people. He has been preparing for this day. She touched his arm lightly. It was Eleanor's plan. a final sanctuary if all else failed. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Mason made his decision, gathering Eleanor's papers and the precious vial of water. "Lead the way," he said to Mahala. Margaret handed him a package of food and a small revolver. "The tunnel is narrow but clear. Follow the markers. White stones placed every 20 paces. They'll lead you to the creek, then east to the old boundary line." As they prepared to descend into the cellar, Margaret clasped Mason's hand. "Eleanor loved you deeply," she said, her eyes kind but firm. "Everything she did, the secrets, the preparations, was to protect what matters most. Your children and the legacy she knew they must inherit." Mason nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you for everything." "Go," Margaret urged as a horse nickered outside. "I'll delay them as long as I can." The cellar door closed behind them, plunging the group into darkness broken only by the small lantern Mahala had lit. The earthen tunnel stretched ahead, its low ceiling forcing Mason to stoop. As they moved forward, he heard the muffled sound of Margaret's voice above, greeting the visitors with convincing innocence. Mahala led the way, the twins following close behind her like ducklings after their mother. Mason brought up the rear, every sense alert for sounds of pursuit. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and roots, occasionally widening into small chambers where supplies had been stored. Blankets, preserved food, even spare clothing. "Eleanor prepared well," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Ahead of him, Mahala paused briefly. "She knew what was coming," she replied without turning. She saw clearly while others looked away. They continued in silence, following the white stone markers as instructed. The journey seemed endless in the close darkness, but finally the tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air filtered down, carrying the scent of water and pine. The exit was concealed beneath a fallen log, screened by thick undergrowth. Mahala emerged first, checking for danger before signaling the others to follow. They found themselves in a small clearing beside the creek, perhaps a mile downstream from Margaret's cabin. The sun had begun its westward descent, casting long shadows through the trees. "We must move quickly," Mahala said. "The sacred pool is half a day's journey east." "Will Margaret be safe?" Mason asked, looking back the way they had come. "She has protected herself for many years," Mahala replied. "Pike underestimates her at his peril." With the twins between them, they set off along the creek, staying beneath the cover of trees. The forest grew denser as they traveled, the land gradually rising toward the distant foothills where the Apache still maintained a tenuous hold on their ancestral territories. As they walked, Mason found himself studying Mahala with new eyes. She moved through the wilderness with fluid grace, at home in this landscape in a way he had never been despite his years on the frontier. The twins mirrored her movements unconsciously, placing their feet where she did, maintaining the same watchful silence. "Why did you really come to Sundown Ridge?" he asked when they paused to rest. "The night of the fire." Mahala took a drink from her water skin before answering. "I dreamed of fire for 3 nights, she said finally. "On the 3rd night, I saw your children in the flames. I knew it was time." "Time for what?" "To fulfill my promise to Eleanor." She met his gaze directly. "To protect what she valued most." "The sacred pool?" "The children," Mahala corrected. "The pool can be defended by others. But Sophia and Nathan—" She looked toward the twins who were examining a fallen log with quiet fascination. "They are special. They stand between 2 worlds as Eleanor did." Mason felt the weight of new understandings settle upon him. "Because of the ceremony before their birth, the water from the sacred pool?" Mahala nodded. "They were touched by old medicine. It flows in their blood, shapes their dreams, opens their eyes to what others cannot see." Her expression grew solemn. "Pike knows this. It is another reason he hunts them." "My children?" Mason felt a surge of protective fury. What possible interest could he have in them? "Those who control the water control the future," Mahala said. "Those who understand its secrets hold even greater power." She glanced significantly at Sophia, who was now whispering to her brother while pointing at a pattern in the tree bark. "Your daughter sees true visions, Mason. Your son hears what the land itself whispers. Such gifts are beyond price to men like Pike." The implications chilled Mason to his core. Not just his land, not just the secret of the sacred pool. Pike was hunting his children. the last living connections to Eleanor, carriers of knowledge they themselves didn't yet understand. "We need to move," he said grimly, checking the revolver Margaret had given him. "Now." The forest grew wilder as they traveled eastward, the trees older and more massive, the undergrowth denser. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, creating an atmosphere both beautiful and slightly unnerving. Birds called from unseen perches, and occasionally small animals darted across their path, seemingly unafraid of human presence. "We're entering old territory," Mahala explained, as they navigated a particularly thick section of woods. "Few white men come here. The land remembers the old ways." Mason might once have scoffed at such a statement. Now, after all he had witnessed, he found himself attuned to subtle changes in their surroundings. The particular quality of the silence, the way the air felt heavier, charged somehow with expectation. The twins sensed it too. Their earlier fatigue had given way to alert curiosity. They walked more confidently now, occasionally pointing out things to each other in a whispered Apache that Mason couldn't understand. He caught Mahala watching them with an expression of quiet pride. "They remember," she said simply when she noticed his observation. "Remember what?" Mason asked. "They've never been here before." "Their spirits have," Mahala replied. "Before birth, they traveled these paths with their mother. The land recognizes them as they recognize it." Again, Mason found himself unable to dismiss her words outright. Something was happening to his children, had been happening since long before the fire, perhaps since before their birth. The evidence was before his eyes. Nathan, normally so quiet and reserved, now moved through the forest with confidence, occasionally stopping to touch a particular tree or stone as if greeting an old friend. Sophia hummed softly to herself, an Apache melody that Mason had never taught her, that she could only have learned from Mahala or in her dreams. As the afternoon waned, they came to a small stream that joined the creek they had been following. Mahala led them upstream, the path growing steeper and rockier. The twins showed no signs of tiring, their small legs navigating the difficult terrain with surprising agility. "Not much farther," Mahala assured them as they climbed. "Joseph will be waiting." The mention of her brother reminded Mason of another question that had been forming in his mind. "The night of the fire," he began, "how did you know which room the children were in?" Mahala didn't break stride, but he saw her shoulders stiffen slightly. "I told you, I dreamed it." "You knew the layout of my house," Mason pressed. "A house you'd never been inside." She glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "Who says I was never inside?" Before Mason could respond, the forest opened suddenly into a clearing. At its center stood a tall Apache man, his hair streaked with gray at the temples, his face weathered by sun and time. Despite his age, perhaps 50, he carried himself with the straight-back dignity of a much younger warrior. "Brother?" Mahala called in greeting. Joseph White Eagle nodded solemnly. His eyes, dark and penetrating, moved from Mahala to Mason, and finally to the twins. When he spoke, his English was clear and unaccented. "Eleanor's children," he said, a note of wonder in his deep voice. "They have grown strong." Sophia broke away from the group, approaching Joseph without fear. "You're the man from the water," she said with a child's directness. "The one who sang with Mama." Joseph knelt to her level, genuine emotion crossing his stoic features. "You remember well, little one." He looked up at Mason. "Your daughter has the sight, like her mother." Mason felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted yet again. "Eleanor had visions?" "She saw true," Joseph confirmed, rising to his full height. "It is why she prepared so carefully for what was to come." He gestured toward a narrow path leading upward through the rocks. "The sacred pool awaits. We should not linger here. Pike's men have been seen in the foothills." As they followed Joseph along the rising path, Mason's mind raced to absorb this new information. Eleanor had been gifted with foresight? Had she known about her own death? About the fire? About Mahala's arrival to save their children? How much of what was happening now had been part of her design? The path wound upward, eventually leading to a sheltered canyon nestled between two rocky outcroppings. The western sky blazed crimson and gold as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. At the canyon's heart lay a small, perfectly circular pool, its water so clear that the smooth stones at its bottom were visible despite its depth. Several Apache men and women moved about the canyon, some tending small fires, others preparing evening meals or working with animal hides. They looked up as the group approached, their expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness to recognition. Our last stronghold, Joseph explained quietly, 28 souls who refused the reservation. We live by the old ways, protected by the sacred waters. The pool itself seemed to glow in the fading light, its surface unnaturally still despite the gentle breeze that stirred the canyon. Mason found his gaze drawn to it, a strange sense of familiarity washing over him. "I've been here before," he said, not fully aware he was speaking aloud. "Yes," Joseph confirmed, "once, though you may not remember." Mason turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" The Apache leader's expression remained steady. "After the ambush that killed your unit, you were the only survivor. Do you recall how you escaped with wounds that should have been fatal?" A cold shock ran through Mason as buried memories surfaced. The Apache raid on his cavalry patrol during the war, 15 men dead in minutes, himself left for dead with a bullet in his chest and another in his leg. His miraculous recovery that the army doctors had never been able to explain. The strange gap in his memories between the attack and waking in a field hospital 2 weeks later. "I was found by a hunting party," he said slowly, the official story he'd been told and had come to believe. "That is the story they gave you," Joseph said, his voice gentle but firm. "The truth is different." Mason shook his head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I would remember something like that." "Would you?" Joseph asked. "Or would your mind protect you from what it could not accept?" "What are you saying?" Mason's voice had grown hoarse. "My father, Dancing Elk, found you near death. He brought you here to this sacred pool. For 7 days you lay between worlds while the waters healed you." "No," Mason protested, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "The Army records." "Tell the story the Army needed to tell," Joseph finished. "They could not admit that Apache medicine saved one of their soldiers when their doctors had declared him beyond hope." Mason's hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his chest where the bullet had entered. "But why? Why would your father save an enemy?" "He saw something in you," Joseph said simply. "A purpose unfulfilled." The waters agreed. He glanced significantly at the twins who had approached the pool's edge with Mahala. "Perhaps now we understand what that purpose was." The revelation staggered Mason. If Joseph spoke the truth, and something deep within recognized its ring of authenticity, then his entire understanding of his past was built on illusion. The very people he had come to distrust and fear after the war had been his saviors. "Why now?" he asked finally. "Why save an enemy soldier?" "My father saw something in you," Joseph said simply. "A purpose unfulfilled." The waters agreed. He glanced significantly at the twins who had approached the pool's edge with Mahala. "Perhaps now we understand what that purpose was." As Mason struggled to process this new reality, a commotion arose from the canyon entrance. A young Apache man ran toward them, speaking urgently to Joseph in their native tongue. The leader's expression darkened as he listened. "What is it?" Mason asked, tension returning to his body. "Pike," Joseph replied grimly. "He comes with many men, not just his own, but soldiers from Fort Laramie." "Soldiers?" Mason was incredulous. "The Army has no jurisdiction in a land dispute." "They do if they believe they hunt dangerous Apache renegades," Joseph countered. "Pike has convinced the fort commander that we raided settlements and stole white children." Mason's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. "My children. He's using my children as an excuse for a military action." Joseph nodded grimly. "We have perhaps an hour before they reach the canyon." "We need to leave," Mason insisted, looking toward his children who remained by the pool with Mahala. "Find another sanctuary." "There is nowhere Pike will not follow," Joseph said quietly. "Not while he believes the secret of the waters can be his." A new voice joined their conversation. Victoria Blackwood's distinctive tones, surprisingly calm given the circumstances. "He's right, Mason. Pike won't stop." Mason turned in shock to find Victoria emerging from one of the canyon shelters, dressed in practical riding clothes rather than her usual formal attire. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, making her look younger, less severe. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" She approached slowly, her expression complex, regret mingled with determination. Finishing what my husband started, honoring a promise he made to Eleanor. Mason's confusion must have shown on his face, for Victoria continued, her voice gentler than he had ever heard it. Thomas wasn't just Eleanor's friend. He was her ally in protecting the sacred pool. Pike killed him for it, made it look like a hunting accident when he refused to reveal the pool's location. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I've been playing a dangerous game, Mason, appearing to side with Pike while secretly working against him. The foreclosure threats, the pressure to sell? Victoria nodded. I needed Pike to believe I was his ally. It was the only way to stay close enough to learn his plans, to warn those who needed warning. She glanced toward Joseph. I sent word as soon as I confirmed he had contacted the fort. Mason's mind raced to realign his understanding of the past weeks, months, years. Victoria as an ally, not an enemy. Thomas Blackwood, murdered for protecting Eleanor's secret. His own miraculous survival at the hands of people he had been taught to fear. And at the center of it all, Eleanor, his wife, mother of his children, keeper of secrets he was only now beginning to comprehend. How many layers of protection had she woven around them before her death? How many contingencies had she prepared for the danger she foresaw? The twins' voices rose in excitement from the pool's edge, drawing everyone's attention. Sophia was pointing at the water, which had begun to glow with an ethereal blue light as the sun's final rays disappeared behind the canyon walls. It's time, Joseph said quietly. The waters awaken at dusk. As Mason watched, Mahala guided the children to sit at the pool's edge, their small feet dangling in the luminescent water. She began to sing, a haunting melody that was soon joined by other voices from around the canyon. The Apache were gathering, forming a circle around the sacred pool as its otherworldly glow intensified. Victoria moved to stand beside Mason, her expression solemn. I've seen this ceremony only once before, she whispered. The night Eleanor came to save her pregnancy. The night your children were touched by the old magic. Magic, Mason repeated, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Yet as he watched the water's glow reflect on his children's faces, as he felt the ancient song resonate in his chest like a second heartbeat, he could find no other word for what he was witnessing. In that moment, with Pike and his soldiers approaching, and the future uncertain, Mason Holloway stood at the threshold between the world he had known and the one Eleanor had glimpsed. Behind him lay the comfortable certainties of his former life. Before him, mysteries he was only beginning to comprehend. And somewhere in the spaces between heartbeats, he felt Eleanor's presence, not as a ghost or memory, but as a continuing force. Her love and foresight still guiding them even now, 2 years after her physical form had returned to the earth. The ceremony built towards some unseen crescendo, the singing growing more intense, the pool's glow more radiant. Mason's children sat transfixed, their expressions serene despite the danger approaching. Whatever happened next, he knew with sudden clarity, had been set in motion long before the fire, perhaps even before Eleanor's death. They had reached a moment of convergence, past and future, white and Apache, science and spirit, love and legacy. As the sacred pool pulsed with ancient power and the twins raised their small voices to join the ceremony, Mason accepted a truth that would have once seemed impossible. Some forces transcended understanding. Some connections defied explanation. And some journeys once begun could only be followed to their end, wherever that might lead. In the distance, the first sounds of approaching horse echoed through the gathering darkness. The final confrontation was coming. Pike and his men, the secret of the sacred pool, the future Mason's children would inherit. Whatever happened next would determine not just their fate, but the fate of something far older and more profound than any single life. Mason checked his revolver one last time and moved to stand protectively near his children. The ceremony continued unabated, the Apache seemingly unconcerned by the approaching danger. Whatever plan Joseph and Victoria had conceived, they showed no sign of abandoning the ritual that was clearly of paramount importance. As the pool's glow reached its peak intensity, bathing the entire canyon in unearthly blue light, Mason felt a strange calm settle over him. Eleanor had prepared for this moment. Mahala had come as promised. The waters that had once saved his life now embraced his children. Perhaps, after all, there was a design at work, one that even Jefferson Pike, with all his greed and power, could not undo. The approaching hoofbeats echoed through the canyon like distant thunder, growing steadily louder as Pike's men drew near. Mason stood at the edge of the sacred pool, watching its ethereal blue glow illuminate the faces of his children. Sophia and Nathan remained seated with their feet in the water, seemingly oblivious to the danger, their expressions serene as they joined in the Apache ceremony. Joseph White Eagle moved among his people with quiet authority, speaking brief instructions that sent some to take defensive positions at the canyon entrance, while others continued the ritual unabated. The juxtaposition was striking, preparation for battle alongside an ancient spiritual ceremony, both proceeding with equal gravity. "What's the plan?" Mason asked Victoria, who had retrieved a rifle from one of the Apache shelters and now checked its loading mechanism with practiced hands. "We hold them off until the ceremony is complete," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension etched on her face. "After that," she glanced toward the pool, "after that, the waters decide." "That's not a plan," Mason objected. "Pike has soldiers with him, trained men with military weapons." Victoria's expression hardened. "My husband thought like you once, believed in logical solutions, proper channels, the rule of law. It got him killed." She nodded toward Mahala, who was leading the ceremonial singing, her voice rising clear and strong above the others. "Some forces can't be understood through ordinary means, Mason. Eleanor knew that. It's time you did too." Before Mason could argue further, Joseph approached, his weathered face solemn in the pool's unearthly light. "Pike comes with 12 men," he reported, "6 soldiers, 6 of his own. They have surrounded the canyon." "We're trapped," Mason realized with a sinking feeling. Joseph shook his head. "There is always a path for those who see clearly." He handed Mason a small clay bowl filled with a dark, fragrant paste. "Put this on your face and hands. It will help you move unseen in darkness." Mason hesitated only briefly before complying, applying the mixture to his skin. It felt cool and tingled slightly, the scent reminiscent of pine and something more exotic he couldn't identify. As the substance dried, he noticed how it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His hands became shadowy, harder to track with the eye. "The ancient ones used this to hunt at night," Joseph explained, "to become one with the darkness." Victoria had already applied the mixture to her own face, the camouflage transforming her refined features into something wild and formidable. "Thomas taught me to shoot," she said, answering Mason's unasked question about her comfort with firearms. "I've been practicing ever since his death." A shout came from the canyon entrance, one of the Apache scouts returning at a run. He spoke rapidly to Joseph in their native tongue, gesturing toward the eastern ridge. "Pike is coming himself," Joseph translated grimly. "With the army captain, they demand we surrender the children and the Apache woman." Mason's hand tightened on his revolver. "They'll have to kill me first." "That is precisely what Pike intends," Victoria said quietly. "With you dead, the children become wards of the territory, easy to manipulate, easy to control." The realization hit Mason like a physical blow. Pike had orchestrated everything. The fire, the pursuit, this confrontation, not just to gain the secret of the sacred pool, but to eliminate Mason himself and gain control of the twins. Children who, if Mahala and Joseph were to be believed, possessed unusual gifts connected to the mysterious waters. "What do we do?" he asked, looking toward his children, still peaceful at the pool's edge despite the growing tension around them. "We trust the ceremony," Joseph replied, "and we fight only if we must." At the sacred pool, the ritual had reached a new intensity. Mahala's singing had taken on a trance-like quality, words in ancient Apache flowing from her lips in a cadence that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The other participants moved in slow, deliberate patterns around the pool, their shadows elongated and fluid in the blue light. Most remarkable were the twins. Sophia and Nathan sat perfectly still, their eyes closed, small faces upturned, as if listening to something only they could hear. The water around their submerged feet pulsed with light, sending ripples across the pool's surface that defied natural movement, spiraling inward rather than outward, gathering at the center in a slowly rotating vortex. "It's beginning," Victoria whispered, awe evident in her voice. What is? Mason demanded, torn between watching his children and monitoring the canyon entrance where Pike would soon appear. The awakening, Joseph answered cryptically. The waters remember your children. They were born of this place as much as of Eleanor's body. Before Mason could press for a clearer explanation, a commanding voice rang out from the canyon entrance. This is Captain James Harrow of the United States Army. You are harboring fugitives and stolen children. Surrender immediately, or we will take them by force. Joseph stepped forward again, his posture straight and dignified. These children belong to their father, who stands among us by choice. There are no fugitives here, only Apache on their ancestral lands. A different voice responded, smoother, cultured, unmistakably Jefferson Pike's. Mason Holloway is wanted for questioning in the death of Porter Briggs, found murdered at Sundown Ridge. The Apache woman is suspected of abducting his children during the confusion of a tragic house fire. The lies were so brazen that Mason nearly shouted a denial. Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. He's baiting you, she hissed. Stay hidden. Let Joseph handle this. With remarkable restraint, Joseph replied, Your claims have no substance. We will allow you to speak with Mason Holloway under peaceful terms. 2 men only, unarmed, may enter the canyon. A brief consultation could be heard at the entrance, followed by Pike's voice again. Agreed, Captain Harrow and myself will come forward. The rest will maintain positions. Joseph turned to Mason. Stay near the pool. We will bring them to you where the water's power is strongest. And if they try something? Joseph's smile was grim. Then they will learn why the Apache were never truly conquered, merely pushed into shadows. Pike and Captain Harrow entered the canyon with the caution of men walking into enemy territory. Pike's elegant attire was dusty from travel, but his bearing remained impeccable, a man accustomed to commanding respect through presence alone. Captain Harrow was younger, perhaps 30, with the rigid posture and watchful eyes of a career soldier. Both men's gazes swept the gathered Apache with barely disguised suspicion before settling on the glowing pool and the ceremony continuing around it. What devilry is this? Harrow muttered, hand instinctively moving toward where his sidearm would normally be. Native superstition, Captain, Pike replied smoothly. Nothing to concern us. Joseph led them toward the pool where Mason now stood. The camouflage paste on his face made his features difficult to discern in the strange blue light, but there was no mistaking his stance, protective, unyielding, between the newcomers and his children. Holloway, Pike greeted him with false cordiality. I'm relieved to find you and your children alive. When we discovered Porter's body in the burned ranch, we feared the worst. Did you? Mason's voice was cold. Strange, considering you were the one who set the fire. Pike's expression remained neutral, though something dangerous flickered in his eyes. A serious accusation, especially from a man currently surrounded by Apache while his foreman lies dead. Porter was killed trying to steal something that didn't belong to him, Mason replied. Something you sent him for. Captain Harrow shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the men. Mr. Pike assured me this was a simple case of child abduction. That these people, he gestured toward the Apache, had taken advantage of a ranch fire to steal your children. My children weren't stolen, Mason stated firmly. They're here with me, by my choice. This woman, he indicated Mahala, still leading the ceremony, saved them from the fire Pike's men set. Doubt crept into Harrow's expression. Is this true? Pike's composure slipped momentarily. Captain, we discussed this. The man is clearly under some form of influence. Look around you, primitive rituals, strange lights. These savages have manipulated him. The only manipulation here is yours, Pike. Victoria emerged from the shadows, her camouflage face startling both men. You've been lying to everyone, the army, the bank, the territorial governor, all to get control of the water. Mrs. Blackwood? Harrow appeared genuinely confused. What are you doing here? Finishing what my husband started before Pike murdered him, she replied steadily. Pike's facade finally cracked, anger distorting his handsome features. This is absurd. Thomas Blackwood died in a hunting accident 3 years ago. An accident you arranged, Victoria countered, just as you arranged the fire at Sundown Ridge, just as you've arranged everything, including bringing these soldiers here under false pretenses. Harrow's hand moved again toward his missing weapon, his gaze now fixed suspiciously on Pike. What is she talking about? She's clearly deranged with grief, Pike said dismissively. Has been since her husband's death. Imagining conspiracies where none exist. Then explain this, Mason challenged, withdrawing Eleanor's journal and the water rights document from inside his shirt. Legal proof that the water beneath Sundown Ridge belongs to the Apache by territorial decree, dated 1852. And my wife's journal, detailing how Thomas Blackwood discovered your plans to drain the aquifer for the railroad and threatened to expose you. Pike's expression hardened as he realized the extent of his exposure. Captain, he said with deadly calm, I believe we've confirmed these people are holding the Holloway children against their will. Signal your men. Don't, Victoria warned, raising her rifle. He's using you, Captain. There are no hostages here, only people protecting ancient waters that Pike wants to exploit. Harrow hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and the growing evidence of deception. In that moment of indecision, Pike made his move. With startling speed, Yusuddin, he withdrew a small derringer from his sleeve, aiming directly at Mason. Enough of this, he snarled. The children and the water rights, now. Before anyone could react, the sacred pool's glow intensified dramatically, the blue light pulsing outward in concentric waves. The singing reached a crescendo as Mahala rose to her feet, arms outstretched, voice rising in what sounded like a final invocation. The twins opened their eyes simultaneously, eyes that now glowed with the same ethereal blue as the pool. They spoke in perfect unison, their childish voices somehow amplified and deepened. The waters have decided. Pike faltered, the derringer wavering in his hand as he stared at the children in stunned disbelief. What is this? The water of the sacred pool began to rise, not splashing or flowing, but ascending in a spiral column that twisted toward the night sky. Within its transparent form, images appeared and dissolved. Eleanor's face, dancing elk performing a healing ritual, Thomas Blackwood arguing with Pike beside a stream, Pike striking him from behind with the butt of a rifle. The waters remember, Sophia and Nathan in tone, still speaking as one. They see truth beneath deception. They know who protects and who destroys. Captain Harrow backed away, crossing himself. Mother of God! Pike's composure shattered completely. He fired the derringer wildly, the shot going wide as his hand trembled. Stop this! Stop this now! The column of water surged higher, then abruptly collapsed, not back into the pool, but outward in a rushing wave that swept across the canyon floor. It flowed around the Apache, around Mason and Victoria, around the twins and Mahala, leaving them completely dry. But when it reached Pike, the water engulfed him like a living entity, wrapping around his legs and torso, climbing higher as he screamed. The water's judge, the twins said, their glowing eyes fixed on Pike, as they have since the beginning. Pike struggled frantically as the water rose past his chest, his neck, covering his face despite his desperate thrashing. For one horrifying moment, his terrified expression was visible through the liquid prison. Then the water contracted suddenly, violently, before dispersing into fine mist that hung in the air like morning fog. Pike was gone. No body, no trace, as if he had never existed. Captain Harrow stood frozen, his face pale with shock. What happened to him? The waters took him, Joseph said simply, as they have taken others who came with destruction in their hearts. The blue glow began to fade from the pool, returning to its natural clarity. The twins blinked, the luminescence leaving their eyes, and they suddenly looked like normal children again. Tired, a little confused, leaning against each other for support. Pa, Sophia called, her voice small and ordinary once more. Did we do good? Mason rushed to his children, gathering them into his arms. You're safe now, he murmured, not entirely sure what they had done or how, but certain the danger had passed. Everything's going to be all right. Captain Harrow looked around wildly, as if expecting to be the next to disappear. I need to report to my commanding officer. And say what? Victoria approached him, lowering her rifle. That you witnessed native sorcery? That water consumed a man before your eyes? They'll have you committed. Then what do you suggest? Harrow demanded, still visibly shaken. Victoria exchanged a glance with Joseph before answering. Tell them Pike went missing during a confrontation with peaceful Apache. that you investigated claims of kidnapping and found none, that Mason Holloway and his children are safe and remaining on Apache land by choice. And the men outside the canyon, they saw, they saw fog and confusion, Joseph interrupted. The sacred pool protects its secrets. Harrow looked unconvinced, but he also looked like a man who recognized when he was out of his depth. I want no part of whatever happened here, he said finally. I'll withdraw my men, file a report that Pike disappeared under unexplained circumstances while investigating false claims. A wise decision, Joseph nodded. The path of truth is always safest, even when partial. As Harrow departed to inform his waiting soldiers, Mason sat beside the now ordinary-looking pool, his children leaning against him in exhaustion. Mahala joined them, her ceremony completed, her expression serene despite the extraordinary events that had just transpired. What happened? Mason asked her quietly. What did the twins do? Not the twins alone, Mahala corrected gently. The waters acted through them, as vessels prepared since before their birth. The sacred pool has protected itself this way for generations, judging those who approach with darkness in their hearts. Pike is dead? Mahala considered this. His body is gone, his essence transformed. The waters do not destroy, they change. Mason looked down at his children, now drowsing against him, innocent and ordinary in sleep. The idea that such power had channeled through them was simultaneously terrifying and awe-inspiring. Will they remember? As dreams, perhaps, Mahala replied. Children live with one foot in mystery. As they grow, the veil thickens, unless they are taught to keep it thin. Victoria approached, having seen Captain Harrow and his men depart from the canyon entrance. It's over, she reported, at least for now. What happens next? Mason asked, looking between her and Joseph, these unlikely allies who had helped save his children. Joseph sat cross-legged beside the pool, his weathered face thoughtful in the fading firelight. That depends on you, Mason Holloway. The waters have judged Pike, but they have also tested you. The question remains, what will you do with what you now know? Dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold. The Mason stood at the edge of the canyon, watching the world awaken. The events of the previous night seemed dreamlike in the clear morning light. The glowing pool, the water that rose and consumed Pike, his children speaking with ancient voices. Yet the reality of their situation remained unchanged. Sundown Ridge was gone, burned to ash. Pike might have vanished, but the railroad company would send others. The secret of the sacred pool was safe for now, but for how long? Victoria joined him at his lookout post, offering a steaming cup of coffee. You look troubled. Trying to see a path forward, Mason admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. Everything's changed. I can't just take the twins back to what's left of the ranch and pretend none of this happened. No, Victoria agreed. That life is over, but perhaps that's not a tragedy. Mason studied her face in the morning light, a woman he had misjudged, whose grief and determination had forged her into something formidable. What will you do? Return to Broken Pine, to the bank? She shook her head. I've played that role long enough. Thomas left me more than enough to live comfortably. I think perhaps I'll travel east for a while, visit my sister in Boston. A hint of mischief touched her eyes. After spreading some careful rumors about Pike's unsavory business practices, of course, the railroad will be looking for a new representative by the time I return. And the water rights? Safe with Joseph, Victoria replied, and with you if you choose to stay. The idea startled Mason. Stay? Here with the Apache? Why not? Your children are connected to this place in ways we're only beginning to understand. Mahala could teach them about their gifts. She gestured toward the canyon where the twins were helping collect herbs with Mahala, laughing as they worked. Look at them, Mason. Have you ever seen them so alive? He couldn't deny the truth of her observation. Sophia and Nathan moved through the Apache camp with the comfortable familiarity of children at home, absorbing new skills with remarkable quickness, their natural reticence replaced by curiosity and enthusiasm. The territory officials won't just let an Apache claim to Sundown Ridge stand, he pointed out, even with the original water rights document. Perhaps not, Joseph's voice came from behind them as the Apache leader climbed the path to join their conversation. But they would not question a white rancher's claim, especially one married to an Apache woman. Mason nearly choked on his coffee. Married, a rare smile crossed Joseph's stern features. My sister has watched over your children since before their birth. The waters have connected your fates. Among our people, such bonds are sacred. You're suggesting I marry Mahala? Mason couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. I suggest nothing, Joseph replied calmly. I merely observe what is already forming. The choice, as always, remains yours. With that enigmatic statement, he departed, leaving Mason and Victoria alone again. She seemed to be fighting a smile. It's not an entirely outlandish idea, she commented. You need someone to help with the children. She needs protection from a society that views her people with hostility. Together you could safeguard both Sundown Ridge and the sacred pool. A marriage of convenience, Mason muttered. Victoria's expression grew serious. Is that what you think it would be? I've seen how you look at her, Mason. How she looks at you when she thinks no one notices. There are worse foundations for a union than mutual respect and shared purpose. Before Mason could formulate a response, a commotion arose from the canyon below. Dr. Solomon Fairchild had arrived, his wagon making its careful way along the narrow trail, Margaret seated beside him on the driver's bench. Reinforcements, Victoria observed with satisfaction. Margaret said they would come once they confirmed Pike's men had departed. They descended to greet the newcomers, Mason's mind still reeling from Joseph's suggestion. Marriage to Mahala? The idea was simultaneously foreign and strangely compelling. There was no denying the connection that had formed between them through the extraordinary events they had shared. And his children clearly adored her, responding to her guidance with a natural ease that surpassed even their relationship with him. Dr. Fairchild embraced Mason warmly. We heard what happened from Captain Harrow's men, he said, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed excitement. Quite a remarkable tale, though they seemed confused about certain details. It's probably better that way, Mason replied. Margaret descended from the wagon with Joseph's assistance, her practical clothing dusty from travel, but her bearing as dignified as ever. The children? She asked without preamble. Safe, Mason assured her, thanks in no small part to your help. She nodded in satisfaction. And the sacred pool? Protected, Victoria answered. Pike is gone. Was something passed between the two women, an understanding that transcended words. Margaret simply nodded again. Good. Now we can begin rebuilding. Rebuilding? Mason questioned. Sundown Ridge, Dr. Fairchild clarified, or whatever you choose to call it now. The land remains yours, Mason, or will be again, once Victoria finalizes the paperwork canceling the foreclosure proceedings. I don't understand, Mason admitted. The house is destroyed. The railroad still wants the land. The secret of the waters is safer now than before, Margaret interrupted. Pike's disappearance will be attributed to Apache resistance, reinforcing the belief that the area is dangerous. The railroad will eventually seek another route rather than risk further confrontation. As for rebuilding, Dr. Fairchild continued, that's why we brought supplies. He gestured to the wagon laden with tools, seeds, and building materials. It won't be easy, but with help from Joseph's people and a bit of old-fashioned frontier ingenuity, you could have a new home before winter sets in. Mason felt overwhelmed by their certainty, their assumption that he would simply start again on the land where he had lost so much. And if I choose to leave, take the twins somewhere else, somewhere normal? Fairchild's expression softened. Then we would help with that too. But consider carefully, my boy, normal is a luxury few are truly offered, and fewer still can afford to maintain. Margaret's practical voice cut through his indecision. The children need breakfast and I need coffee. Philosophical discussions can wait until basic needs are met. As they made their way into the canyon, Mason found himself watching Mahala with new awareness. She had seen them approaching and now stood waiting, the rising sun illuminating her profile with golden light. The twins flanked her, as always, but they broke away upon seeing him, running forward with excited cries. Pa, Dr. Fairchild is here, and Miss Margaret, Sophia exclaimed, throwing her arms around his waist. Nathan, typically more reserved, beamed up at him. Can they stay? Mahala says we're going to build a new house where the water and the earth meet. Mason glanced sharply at Mahala, who approached more slowly. I told them of possibilities, she explained. Children need hope to hold on to, especially after darkness. Something in her tone and the gentle wisdom of her words resonated deeply within him. This woman had saved his children twice now, first from the fire, then from Pike's machinations. She had guided them through extraordinary circumstances with steady courage and uncommon grace. And if Joseph was to be believed, she had been connected to his family long before he knew of her existence. We should talk, he said quietly, about the future. Mahala nodded, her dark eyes meeting his without hesitation. Yes, there is much to decide. The day passed in a flurry of activity as the Apache camp welcomed the newcomers, and preparations began for what Joseph called the joining of paths. Dr. Fairchild examined the twins thoroughly, pronouncing them in excellent health despite their ordeal. Margaret and Victoria fell into deep conversation with several Apache women, their heads bent together over maps and documents spread across a flat rock near the sacred pool. Mason found himself helping unload the wagon, his mind still grappling with the magnitude of the changes before him. Rebuilding on Sundown Ridge meant embracing a new understanding of the land he had thought was simply his property. It meant acknowledging forces beyond his comprehension, mysteries that defied rational explanation. It meant joining his future with Mahala's in ways that would challenge not just his own preconceptions, but the prejudices of an entire society. Yet the alternative, leaving, starting fresh somewhere distant, felt increasingly hollow. How could he take his children away from a place that had shaped them before birth? How could he deny the connection they clearly felt to Mahala, to the Apache, to the sacred waters that had manifested through them with such extraordinary power? As evening approached, Joseph suggested a council to discuss the path forward. They gathered around the central fire, the adults forming a circle while the twins played nearby under the watchful eye of an Apache grandmother. Joseph opened with a prayer in his native tongue, the melodic syllables rising with the smoke toward the darkening sky. We stand at a crossroads, he began when the prayer concluded. The threat of Pike is ended, but the world beyond this canyon continues its relentless advance. The railroad, the settlers, the soldiers, all press closer each season. Our ways, our sacred places, grow ever more endangered. He looked directly at Mason. Yet here, perhaps, we may find a new path. Not surrender, not retreat, but adaptation, a joining of strengths. Dr. Fairchild nodded in agreement. The medical knowledge of the Apache deserves preservation and study. Eleanor began that work. It should continue. The water rights provide legal protection, Victoria added, but only if properly leveraged. A partnership between Mason's ranch and Joseph's people offers the strongest position. Margaret, practical as always, focused on immediate concerns. Winter comes soon. Building must begin within the week if there's to be proper shelter before the first snow. Mason listened to their discussion with growing clarity. They were offering him not just a plan for rebuilding, but a vision for something entirely new. A place where two cultures might coexist, where ancient wisdom and modern necessity could find balance. And what does Mahala think? He asked finally, turning to the woman who had remained silent throughout the council. All eyes shifted to her. She sat straight-backed and dignified, her expression thoughtful in the firelight. I think, she said carefully, that the waters brought us together for a purpose greater than any single person. I think your children carry both worlds within them and will need both to find their true path. Her gaze met Mason's, direct and unflinching. I think fear of the unknown keeps many from their destiny. The simplicity and truth of her words resonated in the silence that followed. Mason felt something settle within him. Not certainty exactly, but acceptance of the journey before them, whatever it might entail. Then we rebuild, he declared. Not just a house, but something new. A place where the waters are protected, where knowledge is preserved, where my children can learn both ways. Joseph nodded in approval. And Mahala's place in this new beginning? The question hung in the air, direct and unavoidable. Mason looked at Mahala, really looked, seeing not just the woman who had saved his children, but a person of depth and courage, whose path had been entwined with his family's long before they formally met. That depends on what she wants, he answered honestly. Mahala held his gaze steadily. I want what Eleanor asked of me, to protect the waters, to guide the children, to honor the old ways while finding a place in the new. As my wife? Mason asked quietly. A murmur ran through the gathered circle at his directness. Mahala's expression remained composed, but something softened in her eyes. Such a union would join more than two people, she replied. It would join two worlds, two traditions, two futures. It is not a decision to make in haste. No, Mason agreed, but it is a beginning to consider with an open heart. The conversation shifted to practical matters after that, building plans, land boundaries, arrangements for the coming winter. As the council concluded and people drifted away to their evening tasks, Mason found himself walking beside Mahala toward the sacred pool. The twins had fallen asleep by the fire, watched over by Margaret, giving the adults a rare moment alone. The pool lay still and ordinary in the gathering twilight, its extraordinary properties hidden beneath a placid surface. They sat on a flat rock at its edge, comfortable silence between them. I never thanked you properly, Mason said finally, for saving my children from the fire. They saved themselves, Mahala replied. I was merely the instrument. Like last night, with Pike. She nodded. The waters work through those who are open to them. The twins have a rare gift. They see no boundaries between worlds. Like their mother, Mason said softly. Yes, Mahala agreed. Eleanor understood much that others missed. She saw connections where others saw divisions. Mason stared into the quiet waters, gathering courage for the question that had been forming since their escape from Sundown Ridge. Were you with her at the end? Mahala's expression grew solemn. Yes, she asked for me when the fever came. Dr. Fairchild brought me in secret, knowing you were in town. The guilt Mason had carried for 2 years, the knowledge that he had been drinking away his sorrows in a Broken Pine saloon while his wife struggled to deliver their children, resurfaced with painful intensity. I should have been there, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Instead, I was where grief and fear had driven you, Mahala finished for him. Eleanor understood. She never blamed you. But she didn't trust me enough to tell me about the sacred pool, about her work with your people. Mahala considered this, her profile serene against the deepening dusk. Trust takes many forms. She trusted you with her heart, with her children, with her hope for the future. She protected you from choices she knew would tear you apart, the choice between your beliefs and her vision. And now? Knew those choices come to you freely, Mahala replied, to embrace what is difficult but true, or to turn away toward what is comfortable but incomplete. Mason looked at her, this remarkable woman who spoke hard truths with gentle wisdom. In the fading light with the sacred pool beside them, and the memory of all they had witnessed together, he felt a certainty forming within him. I don't want comfortable and incomplete, he said quietly. Not anymore. Something like a smile touched Mahala's lips. Then we begin as Eleanor hoped we would, not in haste but with purpose. As darkness settled fully over the canyon, they walked back toward the fires of the camp side by side, not touching but connected nonetheless by understanding, by shared purpose, by a future neither could fully envision, but both were willing to explore. The twins slept peacefully under Margaret's watchful eye, their small faces relaxed in the security of deep slumber. Mason looked at them, these extraordinary children, born of Eleanor's courage and vision, touched by ancient powers, carriers of two worlds within their innocent forms. Whatever path lay ahead, whatever challenges the joining of cultures might bring, the protection of these children and the legacy they represented would remain his guiding purpose. And if that path included Mahala walking beside him, bringing her strength and wisdom to join with his determination and resources, perhaps Eleanor's vision could truly take root and flourish. 3 months later, the first snow of winter dusted the new structures rising on the site where Sundown Ridge Ranch had once stood. Not a replica of the original, but something different, a blending of styles and purposes that reflected its unique inhabitants. The main house combined elements of traditional Apache design with frontier practicality: stone foundation, sturdy log walls, multiple hearths for the harsh Wyoming winters. But it also featured rounded elements reminiscent of Apache shelters, carefully positioned windows that aligned with seasonal celestial events, and a central great room designed for both family living and community gatherings. Nearby stood a smaller building that Dr. Fairchild had dubbed the Research Center, a place where Apache healing knowledge could be documented, studied, and preserved alongside Western medical practices. Eleanor's journals formed the core of its growing library, supplemented by Dancing Elk's oral traditions as related by Mahala and Joseph. Most significant was the structure built over the main access point to the sacred pool, a spring house that appeared ordinary from outside, but contained ceremonial space within, accessible only to those deemed worthy by Joseph's people. The spring itself now flowed through a carefully designed system that provided water for the ranch while protecting the main aquifer from exploitation. Mason stood on the porch of the new house, watching the soil drift down in lazy spirals. Behind him, the sounds of domestic life filled the warm interior. Margaret instructing the twins on proper table setting, Victoria and Dr. Fairchild engaged in spirited debate over some obscure medical text, Joseph's deep voice relating a traditional winter tale to several rapt listeners, and Mahala moving through it all with quiet grace, equally at home tending the cooking fire or consulting on the placement of ceremonial objects throughout the new dwelling. Not yet his wife in formal terms, both had agreed to observe the Apache custom of a full cycle of seasons before finalizing such a union. But in all practical ways, they had become partners in this ambitious undertaking. The sound of approaching horses drew Mason's attention. A small party was making its way up the main trail, bundled against the cold. He recognized the lead rider as Sheriff Donovan from Broken Pine, a generally fair-minded man who had remained neutral during the events surrounding Pike's disappearance. Mason stepped off the porch to greet them, curious about this unexpected visit. The sheriff dismounted, stamping his feet against the cold as he approached. "Holloway," he nodded in greeting. "Quite a place you're building here." "Sheriff," Mason returned the nod. "What brings you out in this weather?" Donovan gestured toward the documents case slung over his shoulder. "Official business, I'm afraid. Got papers from the territorial governor's office." Mason tensed, anticipating some new challenge to their precarious arrangement. "What kind of papers?" The sheriff's weathered face revealed little. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." Mason led him into the house, where conversation halted as the assembled company took note of the official visitor. Victoria moved to stand beside Mason, her presence a silent show of support. Mahala gathered the twins close, her expression carefully neutral but her posture alert. Sheriff Donovan cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with so many eyes upon him. "I've been instructed to deliver these documents regarding the status of this property and its unusual arrangements." He withdrew several official-looking papers from his case. Following the investigation into Jefferson Pike's disappearance and subsequent revelations about his business practices, the territorial governor has reviewed the situation personally. He handed the documents to Mason, who scanned them quickly, his expression changing from wariness to surprise. "This is official recognition of the water rights dating back to 1852, the sheriff confirmed, and provisional approval for what the governor is calling an experimental cooperative settlement between your ranch and the Apache group under Joseph White Eagle's leadership." Joseph stepped forward, his disbelief evident. "The governor recognizes our claim?" "With conditions," Donovan clarified. "Regular reports to the territorial Indian agent, no expansion beyond the currently settled area, and compliance with general territorial laws." He shrugged. "It's unprecedented, but after the railroad company withdrew their interest in the region following Pike's disappearance, there was less opposition." Victoria's smile held a hint of satisfied cunning. How fortunate that Western Pacific discovered serious financial irregularities in their Western Expansion Division. Such a scandal. Mason shot her a questioning look, to which she responded with an innocent shrug that fooled no one. Clearly her trip east had involved more than visiting her sister in Boston. "There's one more thing," the sheriff added, producing a final document. "This arrived from Boston last week, addressed to Dr. Fairchild, but marked for delivery here." The doctor accepted the envelope with raised eyebrows, adjusting his spectacles as he broke the seal. His expression softened as he read. "It's from Eleanor's sister, Catherine," he explained, looking up at Mason. "She's finally received all our letters explaining what happened. She writes that she's making arrangements to visit in the spring to meet her niece and nephew at last." He paused, glancing at Mahala, and to thank the woman who saved their lives. The significance of this news washed through the room. Eleanor's sister, the last connection to her Eastern family, who had disapproved of her frontier marriage, was not only acknowledging the children but planning to visit them in their new home. She also mentions, Dr. Fairchild continued with a small smile, that she has arranged for Eleanor's inheritance to be released to the children's trust. Apparently, their grandfather left a considerable sum that was held in dispute after Eleanor's unconventional marriage. Mason felt momentarily overwhelmed. In a single afternoon, their precarious experiment had gained legal recognition, financial security, and a connection to Eleanor's family they had thought permanently severed. The world changes, Joseph observed quietly. Sometimes for the better, when people of courage push against its boundaries. Sheriff Donovan, seemingly embarrassed by the emotional undercurrents in the room, made his excuses soon after delivering the documents. As Mason walked him back to his horse, the sheriff paused. "People in town talk, you know," he said awkwardly, "about you living out here with the Apache woman, about your children speaking her language." Mason stiffened. "Is that official business too?" Donovan shook his head. "No, personal observation." He adjusted his hat, squinting at the falling snow. "My grandmother was Cherokee. Never talked about it much. Wasn't safe to, in her day. But she knew things, medicines, stories, ways of seeing that didn't fit with what the preachers taught." He met Mason's gaze directly. "What I'm saying is, some bridges need building. Been too much burning in this territory." With that cryptic statement, he mounted and led his party back down the trail, leaving Mason to ponder the unexpected alliance. Perhaps their vision was less isolated than they had imagined. Perhaps, like the underground river that connected distant springs, there existed hidden currents of understanding throughout the territory, waiting only for the right moment to surface. When he returned inside, the celebration was already beginning. Victoria had produced a bottle of fine brandy saved for a special occasion. Dr. Fairchild proposed a toast to new beginnings built on ancient foundations. Even Joseph, normally reserved, joined in with dignified pleasure. Amid the excitement, Mason noticed Mahala slip outside with a small bundle in her hands. He followed, finding her at the edge of the ceremonial spring house, kneeling in the light snow. She had opened a small fire pit built specifically for offerings, and was carefully placing items into the flames. Herbs, a lock of hair, something that looked like a piece of fabric. As she worked, she sang softly in Apache, the melody hauntingly familiar. Mason waited at a respectful distance until she finished her ritual before approaching. "Eleanor's lullaby," he said quietly, "the one she used to hum." Mahala nodded, rising gracefully despite the cold ground. "I taught it to her during the long nights before the twins were born. It honors those who watch from beyond the veil." "You were making an offering to Eleanor?" "And to Dancing Elk, to Thomas Blackwood, to all who sacrificed to bring us to this moment." She brushed snow from her skirt. "The old ones taught that no joy is complete unless shared with those who made it possible." Mason felt a tightness in his throat. "Do you think she knows, Eleanor, about all of this?" He gestured toward the new buildings, the legal documents, the future taking shape around them. Mahala's smile was gentle but certain. "She sees. The waters connect all worlds, Mason. Those who have passed beyond remain part of the great circle." Together they watched the smoke from the offering fire rise into the snowy sky, carrying messages to realms beyond ordinary understanding. The cold should have been uncomfortable, but Mason felt only a profound sense of rightness, of pieces long scattered finally finding their proper arrangement. When Mahala shivered slightly, Mason removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders without thinking. Their eyes met in quiet acknowledgement of the gesture's significance. Not a grand romantic declaration, but something more authentic. Care expressed through action, protection freely offered and accepted. "We should rejoin the others," Mahala said after a moment. Mason nodded, but neither moved immediately. In the gentle silence of falling snow, with the smoke of remembrance rising between them and the sounds of celebration emanating from the warm house beyond, they stood together on the threshold of something new, yet ancient. A joining of paths that Eleanor had foreseen and prepared for with her final acts of love. Inside, the twins would be waiting, those remarkable children who had channeled the power of sacred waters and now ran laughing between two worlds. Joseph and the others would be planning next steps, new buildings, spring plantings. Life continuing, evolving, finding fresh expressions through the merging of seemingly separate traditions. Yes, Mason agreed finally. They're waiting for us. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house, their footprints marking a single path through the gathering snow. A path that led not to the past or the unknown future, but to the home they were building together day by day, choice by choice, beneath the watchful shadows of Sundown Ridge. 1 year later, spring bloomed vivid and wild across Sundown Ridge. Wildflowers carpeted fields once barren, and the stream from the sacred spring flowed stronger through the valley. From the hilltop, Mason gazed down at the rebuilt ranch, now home not just to his family, but to 20 Apache families, a growing medical research center, and a gathering place for those who believed in the power of harmony. Catherine, Eleanor's sister, had stayed beyond her initial planned visit, captivated by her sister's legacy and her affection for her niece and nephew. She had even learned a few Apache phrases, enough to converse with Joseph and the elders of the tribe. As the sun began to set, Mahala stepped onto the porch, her belly slightly swollen beneath her dress, a sign of the child they would soon welcome. This baby would be a true bridge between worlds, carrying the blood of both cultures. Sophia and Nathan ran circles around her, laughing, chattering incessantly in both languages, comfortable in both of their heritages. Mason moved to his wife's side, slipping an arm around her shoulders. No longer a marriage of convenience or duty, the months of living and sharing had transformed respect and admiration into deep love. They stood together, looking out over the land where two underground rivers converged, where sacred waters flowed, where two cultures had found harmony. In the distance, a wagon train appeared on the main road, more families migrating from the east, drawn by stories of a place in Wyoming where white and Apache lived peacefully together, where the sick found healing, where past and future existed side by side. From the spirit world, Eleanor's song still echoed in Mason's dreams, no longer a painful memory, but a gentle reminder that sometimes death is not an end, but a beginning, that love can reach beyond the boundaries between worlds. Will it work? Mason wondered aloud, thinking of the uncertain future before them, the challenges of a bold dream in a world often unforgiving. Mahala smiled, placing a hand on her belly. What is born of water and love does not easily fade. She looked toward the children, now leading the newcomers into the ranch. Look, the new era has already begun. As the sun disappeared completely and the first stars appeared, Mason knew that whatever the future brought, whatever the outside world might intrude, they had created something more precious than gold, stronger than steel, more enduring than stone. A legacy Eleanor would be proud of, a gift to generations yet unborn, a promise that two civilizations could find common ground even after decades of conflict. The shadows at Sundown Ridge were no longer shadows of sorrow, but shadows of hope, long and strong reaching eastward, where the sun would rise again tomorrow.